This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's first on-demand workshop, How to Become a Coffee Consultant. Available now online for you to learn at your own pace with a certificate available upon completion. Click the link in the show notes to access today for just €50. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 3 of a 5-part series with Shivaun Bromley, and we are talking about human resources in the coffee industry. Now, we're going to get a little into the weeds here with regards to HR, and we're going to be talking about something called compliance. So, Shivaun, help us understand what compliance is and why we need to know about it in a workplace.
Look, and I'm really pleased we got to talk about culture first, because that's, I think, a little bit more fun and a little bit more important. Notwithstanding, I should obviously advocate, as a good HR practitioner, the importance of governance and compliance in the workplace. So look, at its simplest, compliance is very much around compliance with employment law, or what we call the industrial legislation that might apply to your workforce. Obviously, it will vary by country within which you operate, and my extensive experience is very much with the Australian system, and certainly any business owners out there will be acutely aware of announcements in the last sort of 2 weeks around increases to what we call the minimum wage, and they've been called, for those employees covered by an award, at 5.75%, which
That's wild.
The biggest we've seen in a long time. And I imagine any business owner is just sitting there going, how am I going to absorb that? Along with, your raw material costs, electricity, utility costs. And I think that's, around the world. To then have a wage increase, obviously trying to keep up with inflation for some of our lowest paid workers, but thinking about building that into your business model. I mean, as a consumer, all I've heard about for the last sort of 12 to 18 months is the increasing cost of coffee, because of the cost of beans and various elements in the process. So to then have that hit, it's great for employees. And as I said, very much there to protect, our lower paid employees. But building that into your business and accounting for it comes into effect on the 1st of July. So we've got to be ready. And if you're paying any kind of penalty rate on that, if you're paying, you've got workers on a Sunday or public holiday, like, double time, it's instantly double that amount. So it's a huge, cost to the business. And that's why it's really important to get the structure of your business right, with the right level of employees on the right engagements, be it casual or permanent part-time, so you can really, I guess, balance your workforce to keep it affordable, and to keep the right employees retained, as we talked about.
It's exceptionally difficult for small business owners, especially at a time where, people think there's so much money to be made in cafes. So much money to be made in restaurants and cafes. And folks, if you are listening to this and you are thinking, I want to own a cafe one day, please, I'm going to say it for the 6,000th, millionth, trillionth time on this podcast. You can expect between 3 and 5% net profit if you're running your cafe well. So to put that into context, the two main expenses in a cafe to run a small business in coffee is your rent and your wages. Now, if your wages have just been forcibly increased by the government by 5%, and your average net profit is 3 to 5%, just please think twice and 3 times before you just jump in without understanding what you're getting into. Because we shouldn't have a net profit, an expected net profit of 3 to 5%. The reason we do have that is for a couple of reasons: oversaturation and people opening businesses who don't have any business opening businesses because they don't know what they're doing. And so I want more people to open businesses, but I want more informed people opening businesses, because what that does is that really does push up the success rate of our industry. A way that we do that is to bring people who understand how to manage teams and attrition rates and culture and all of that kind of thing in a small business. I have seen too many businesses close over the last couple of years because they couldn't get staff and they just couldn't survive because they ran out of money because they were closing their doors. Shivaun, how do people approach matching compliance with the challenges of running a small business?
Look, I think, we've talked about this a few times in terms of wearing many hats when you're a small
Right.
business owner. But I think you've got to, give respect, if I can say it that way, to HR, I guess let's call it a policy. Just as you do if you're building a new shop and you have to go through the council process, you have to tick the 85, check boxes, change of use, different things. You need to almost have a look at your HR process as part of your sort of business planning.
Right.
To say, okay, what do I need to do? And an element of that, now you'll start to think about, how am I going to attract employees? How will I onboard them? How will I train them? Rostering, think of all those tactical things. But to me, it's almost a front end thing where you stop and say, okay, and hopefully you've done this. Certainly if they're talking to you, Lee, they will have thought about this in terms of the financials and forecasting, but actually understanding how much they have to pay someone. I don't think many people on the street would necessarily know what the minimum wage is. In the industry,
Right.
There's probably discussion of what are you paying your baristas? They're in hot demand, East Coast, West Coast, and those kind of trends. But do you actually know? I'd say do a little bit of homework in Australia. There's something called the Fair Work Ombudsman. You can go to the website. It'll set out hints and tips for small business owners. It's not too intimidating. Let me tell you, though, too, the same website exists for employees. So they can go on and see their rights and terms and conditions of, their minimum safety nets, if you will. So I think it's something you've got to do a little bit of due diligence on in the front end, just to understand what is it that's regulating, how you pay people. And it's beyond, pay, right? It's hours of work, length of shift, breaks, start, stop time. It's how you engage the employees on what contract, be it casual or part-time, permanent. So there's a number of elements to it, but I think you've got to pay respect to it at the front end to understand. And so another Australian example, understand what modern award applies. Okay, I've looked at it, and the fast food industry award applies to my workforce. Just have some respect for what's in there and how it pertains to your workforce. And if it's not clear, go and get some advice. I think good HR advice will provide a commercially viable outcome. It's not just a cost center.
Right.
HR as a profession
should increase your profitability.
Stigma, right? But for the 2 decades I've been in the industry, we've gone from a back office cost center to a chief HR officer having a seat on the executive table. And that's the reality of it. Good advice is, I might be able to help you structure your workforce such that you can have permanent part-time employees rather than casuals who have, a 25% loading. So good advice should be self-serving and almost self-funding in a sense of what the outcome could be. But I think it's pay some respect at the front end to understanding, okay, the idea is it sets out the minimum terms and conditions, and this is relevant in all countries. So just have a little bit of respect for what's there and understanding it. And I think beyond that, there's an obligation on management, on ownership about creating a safe workplace. Now, you go, occupational health and safety, slips, trips and falls, and you think of the physical, workplace safety, right? And that's important, but it extends beyond that. And again, my reference here is specific to Australia, but will be relevant sort of worldwide. Safety now is legislated, and you have obligations beyond just physical safety, and now to, I guess, in a sense, psychological safety and protecting employees from harassment, from bullying, from discrimination, and making sure you're actively doing something about that, not just dealing with it when it arrives. So when it arises. So, there's the pay. We think compliance and we go, okay, am I paying compliantly, hours of work, scheduling? But it's beyond that too. Am I creating a safe workplace, for employees, both physically and mentally and emotionally, in a way that they can come to work, bring them whole selves to work, and do so in a safe environment.
And gone are the days where you can turn around and say, oops, I didn't know. Right?
The shift is it's almost prove what you did to mitigate this risk
Yeah.
rather than tell us what you did to help the person once it's happened.
And
There's a really strong onus on the employer.
this is coming up again and again and again at the moment, the last couple of years. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. There's a real generational divide between the generation that owns businesses, which is usually Gen Xers and millennials, but particularly the Gen Xers, and the Gen Zers who are coming into the industry. And there's such a difference in the approach. And, this kind of leans on culture as much as it leans on compliance. But there's such a different approach to compliance from both of those two different generations, right? How do you approach bridging the gap between something like that?
I think, as I sort of said, it comes down to your own self-awareness and education, and I guess healthy respect for, how you should be doing things.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fluid environment, and it's dynamic and changing, and it's not a set and forget. But I think having a little bit of transparency, having a little protocol at the front end with new employees, so you can, think about. And I imagine, and I've experienced this in my own small business and just the journey along the way. I mean, employees on day one, can you just write your tax phone number and your bank account details down so I can pay on a scrap piece of paper, versus having a template, and then even now as well, when you often employ someone, you have to give them a fact sheet in Australia, it's Fair Work. And so you have to give them a fact sheet, and do they know their rights? And so we're seeing this real shift. And I think, if you're not aware of it, you will ultimately become aware, because your employees, particularly of this generation, are acutely aware, but will also opt out. And if it's not the way they want to do it, see you later. Like we talked about this, generational difference. So I think you'll be forced to come to an understanding and just a healthy awareness and respect of the need for compliance, because I think it'll be, brought to your attention, if you like, by your employee base more than anything.
Diplomatically said.
I think too, there's been a real shift, and we talked about, I think back to when we maybe had casual jobs, you were grateful to have the job, you turned up, you worked, you expected you would be paid fair price for fair work, sort of thing. There's been a real shift for me, and I'm definitely seeing it in the generational piece of, well, what am I entitled? What am I going to get? And are you the right business for me? Versus, I need a job. Great, you're paying a good wage. Let's make it happen.
Well, now what cafes need to offer, but this is particularly in the US, where a lot of the work that I do is, they have to offer wellness packages to their casual employees. That was not something that our generation expected. Like the idea of suggesting to business owners, if you want to retain staff, you have to give them a stipend every month to spend on either mental health, something to help them with their mental health, or let's say some employees wanted a voucher to juice bars or yoga classes. Like, straight up, folks, someone like me looks at that, because I'm a Gen Xer. Like, for me to turn around and have even uttered the idea of asking for anything other than my wages from my employer was completely nonsensical. But this is a new way of the world, and we have to adapt if we want to keep staff, right?
So. Absolutely. And that, we talked about the employee experience piece when it came to culture, and it's particularly in this industry, you'd think, but it's just a casual job. They're going to be here for a few years and go, but it's so much more than that. It's almost as if they're coming to us with their list of demands before they might accept the role you've got on offer.
I'm just trying to imagine your face, Shivaun, if an employee came up to you and said, "I'll take the job if you give me like a voucher for a juice bar." Every month I went $100. It's like, thank you, bye. Oh, that one. I think Stan and Susan, I would love to see that conversation. Anyway, folks, in the next episode, we're going to talk about all of this, but from the employee's perspective. So what is it like? What is HR like, and the workplace experience like from the employee? We've talked a lot in the first 3 episodes about what it is for the employer, but a big part that's missing is taking the perspective of the employee. So join us for the next episode. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in, friends. There are 2 ways you can support this podcast. Firstly, become a paid member of our YouTube channel. Secondly, you can join our Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video before you leave, and check the show notes for more information. Now, this is what you should check out next.